Hello, welcome to the Tuxedo Summer Bridge and EdCamp Research Cohort. We're the founders of the Teen Think Tank Project, and we founded the organization with the vision of giving teens a voice in the world they will inherit.
We do this by offering a robust social justice education program that fosters the critical thinking, teamwork, communication, and decision-making skills that are necessary for socially conscious teens to make a change in the world.
We've worked with some impressive students to explore societal issues and develop policy frameworks to address them. The students of the Tuxedo Summer Bridge and EdCamp are no exception.
Over the course of 6 weeks, students strengthened their leadership, communication, decision-making, and research skills through our core curriculum and explored 3 social justice topics: sports and social protest, financial stability, and health equity and healthcare policy.
The core curriculum provided the foundational skills to prepare students to not only work collaboratively as a cohort, but to also live and work in a diverse community.
The social justice topics we covered served as an introduction to societal issues that affect the students' local and global communities. Through readings, discussions, and exploration, students began to understand the complexity of issues and uncover the social, political, legal, and economic impediments to solving them.
So without further ado, here's the students' capstone project documenting their journeys from concerned citizens to agents of change.
Enjoy.
Teamwork is an important foundational skill for a social change agent.
It means being able to work together with others for a common purpose.
Whether you are doing a sport, participating in a play, or participating in any other activity, good teamwork is a very important element for a team to be successful. During this program, we all learned how to be better team members.
So, for a social change agent, good communication is one of the most important foundational skills. Being able to be a great communicator means being able to inform others about what you want them to know about, but it also means being able to listen to others when they are talking. Everyone has a different way of communicating, and that's okay, because a strength in one person's communication might be a weakness in another person's communication. When it comes to talking about the issues we see in our society, it is important for people to be able to communicate with each other and hear different perspectives.
Another foundational concept we covered was research. And we get our information from a wide range of sources, like our families, friends, the internet, books, you name it. But the key to academic research is to communicate fact-based information. We have to rely on information that is factual and researched carefully, rather than an individual's opinion. Then we looked at some stats. This helped us better understand causation versus correlation. Causation means that changes in one variable brings about changes in another variable. So there's this cause and effect relationship, while correlation describes an association between these variables, where if one changes, so does the other. Then we touched base on primary and secondary sources. Primary sources provide raw information and first-hand evidence, whereas secondary sources provide second-hand information and commentary from other researchers. And speaking of sources, we also talked about popular and scholarly sources. Popular sources are more informal. They are intended for a general audience and they summarize work. They include lots of colorful visuals and ads. Scholarly sources are more formal. They're intended for a specific audience. Their layout is more proper. There's an abstract in the beginning and they don't have as many colorful visuals or ads. Academic research is important because it allows us to gather information that is unbiased. If we were to ask an individual a question, their answer might be their opinion, and everybody's opinion is different. Academic research allows us to gather the truths from the internet that is specifically researched and carefully put together. And with this, we can teach others the truth.
Decision making is very key. If you're a leader, and allows you to reach the best course of action that will help you achieve your goals and challenges.
Let me ask you this. How can we achieve health equity and gain access to healthcare for everyone? How can we break down the barriers in this complex healthcare system? How did it become so broken in the first place? What comes to your mind? Let's take a look back at the history of the healthcare system, which we can understand from Elizabeth Rosenthal's book, An American Sickness: How Healthcare Became Big Business and How You Can Take It Back. This book highlights her examination on these deeply rooted problems embedded in the healthcare system and offers suggestions for a way forward. 100 years ago, the hospital was notorious for being the place you went to die. The patients were given basic, cheap, and not totally effective treatments, and as a result, sickness took a long time to heal without these antibiotics, anesthetics, and non-steroidal medicines we are fortunate to have today. Then, the only goal was care. Nearly a century ago, the people who founded the Blue Cross Association, a national federation of 38 independent and community-based, locally operated Blue Cross Blue Shield companies, had no idea how their invention of insurance would explode. In 1939, 3 million people had signed up for what was called Blue Cross plans. This was a model that spread, whose goal was to protect patient savings and keep hospitals afloat, not make money. However, within time, new technologies were introduced, which was life-changing. For example, pre-World War II, the treatments were still quite simple and unsophisticated. But during the war, effective ventilators were put on the market. These were breathing machines that moved air in and out of the lungs, and they allowed people to have a greater possibility, a greater chance to be healed from sickness. However, these new technologies called for an expansion of space, so intensive care units and surgery suites were added to hospitals. But this cost more, so the prices became astronomical and insurance was increasingly needed. Now, the healthcare system is more profit-based. 2014 research shows 52% of America's debt is from overdue medical bills, and there are many reasons for this. But the simplest explanation is that the US healthcare system is run just like a business. In fact, it's $1 trillion industry. But are we getting what we pay for? Elizabeth Rosenthal's book warns us that this existing system too often focuses on financial incentives over health or science. That the healthcare system has adopted this business model where the practice of medicine and the business of medicine are disconnected. Therefore, patient success and business success are unlinked. In America, people spend more than twice as much as those in other countries on healthcare. In the United States, the healthcare price per capita is around $11,000, whereas in Japan it's almost $5,000. And you would think with all this money going toward healthcare, we would live longer lives. But the shocking part is that our life expectancy is much lower than it is in Japan. For us, it's 79 years, in Japan it's 85 years, and those 6 years make a difference. It is the American obsession with money that has infiltrated this industry, bankrupting individuals across our country, leaving one tough decision: death or debt.
The economic impediments are not only issues that stand in the way of receiving healthcare. Why doesn't the government do something about this? There are many different healthcare systems, but should the United States move to a single-payer system, socialized medicine, or universal coverage? The single-payer system is a system in which all people are covered by the government, spending money via the tax system. This helps the U.S. population become healthier and spending more capital to be reduced. However, there are higher taxes along the way for healthcare, and it can be implemented without the whole population being covered. Medicare, for example, is a single-payer system in which U.S. citizens 65 or older are covered using Social Security funds. Socialized medicine is a step further, not only where the government pays for healthcare, but where it also employs the medical staff and runs the hospitals. Universal coverage, that is a system where everybody is granted health coverage. The Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is a reform law that sought to increase how many people have insurance, reduce the cost of healthcare, and make the quality of care greater. As a result, it has helped 20 million Americans become insured and expanded the number of people for Medicaid by 13 million people. This was an attempt to accomplish universal coverage. Health policy is the collection of specific laws, programs, entitlements, regulations, administrative directions, and conditions of participation in various aspects of the healthcare system. Impediments are bankruptcy from medical costs, tax credits, negotiate drug prices, eliminate Medicare Advantage and competitive insurance, etc. Policies should be more understood as more than a national or health policy that supports a program operation. Policies are the rules, regulations, and guidelines. The modern concept of healthcare involves access to medical professionals from various fields of work as well as technology and medications, but it is different in many countries. For those who have reached a stalemate within the healthcare system, it is more difficult when they're further discriminated against due to their racial or ethnic group, gender, religion, geographic location, education, physical disability, and more. While we tend to focus on the main racial factors that lead to discrimination, this graph is eye-opening as it displays a wider range of what contributes to the individuals denied the healthcare everybody deserves. It is these disparities that don't allow us to achieve health equity, which by definition is attain his or her full potential, without any discrimination, because nobody is disadvantaged from achieving this potential because of social position or other socially determined circumstances. The large range of disparities come from bias, stereotyping, prejudice, and uncertainty. The problem is that people in the sucking group experience worse health and tend to have less access to the things we need to, like good housing, good education, freedom, and racism, you name it. To help prevent the implicit bias or unconscious racial stereotyping, we need to speak up and educate the population on these issues and raise awareness. For example, there are food deserts that limit access to affordable and nutritious foods, as opposed to areas with grocery stores that allow for a well-balanced meal. Also, the people who live at a far distance from hospitals will find it harder to get care, especially if they can't afford the transportation. People who live in the socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods are more challenged with healthcare access. Those who live in the rural parts may have a more difficult time getting to a hospital, and this can affect their care. Overall, we need to make changes and work to fully implement laws that lead to equality within the healthcare system. The Affordable Care Act worked to serve as universal health coverage, and we should retain this reform law because it has accomplished most of its goals. Helping Americans receive insurance, which is a step forward gaining access to healthcare for all. In terms of taking it back, like Elizabeth Rostow would say, you can start by questioning the care and speaking up.
So today we are going to be talking about financial stability. A person with financial stability spends less than they earn and is able to provide themselves with the basics of living while still having money left over. The problem is, in the US, there has been a giant gap between the rich and the poor that has increased as time has gone on. The poor in this country have a hard time living a prosperous life. Despite being one of the wealthiest nations in many ways, 13.7% of our population is having a hard time living a prosperous life, and they're barely able to live due to being in poverty. Now, my question is, what factors make it harder for people to reach financial stability? Well, there are many impediments that make it harder for people to reach financial stability. An impediment is sort of a problem within a problem, like we discussed before. It's an obstacle that makes it harder for solutions to be, addressed or implemented. There are complex reasons why people are in poverty and have a lack of financial stability, and to understand that, we need to explore the impediments associated with this issue. So now we're going to talk about economic impediments. One thing you'll notice is that a lot of these impediments are interconnected, and they all have one to do with each other. For example, an economic impediment might be directly related to a societal impediment, and a societal impediment might be connected to a legal impediment. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. So one economic impediment is the idea of generational wealth / generational poverty. Generational wealth refers to wealth that is passed down from one generation to the next. Wealth in this sense can mean anything from money, real estate, business, etc. Conversely, generational poverty is a lack of wealth passed down from one generation to the next. Historically, depending on one's race, socioeconomic status, gender, and everything in between, it was harder to build generational wealth, and a lot of these people's descendants still are in poverty to this day. The building of generational wealth plays a huge role in creating the large gap between the rich and the poor in this nation. So now, let's talk about the next economic impediment, which is the lack of disposable income. Going along with generational wealth/poverty, if people want to build financial security, one thing they need is disposable income to invest in a bank. Disposable income is essentially money that can be put to the side if one wishes to do so. The problem is, not everyone has the means of having disposable income, especially if one is very impoverished. This is because they are spending the money on other things they need. For the people who live in public housing, their rent prices are often very high, and it takes a lot out of their income. And this is to the point where they don't have spare money to put in a bank and save for their future generations, so they cannot build generational wealth. And then the cycle of poverty is more likely to continue. Now, this leads me directly to my next economic impediment, which is high rent prices. So oftentimes, rent prices can take up a lot of people's income to the point where they barely have enough money to spend on other things. Housing voucher programs prohibit someone from paying more than 30% of their income on rent. The problem is, not everyone has these housing vouchers. The housing voucher program is supposed to give people the means to find decent housing in high-income neighborhoods. But as you see in the chart, like I said before, not a lot of people have them. And this is because getting a housing voucher or being eligible for one is very restrictive. So now let's move on to societal impediments. So one societal impediment is evicting people from their homes. An eviction is basically when people are legally kicked out of their homes. When it comes to public housing, people might be evicted for causing commotion or breaking the rules of the housing, basically. The problem is, without a house, it's impossible to live well. It's harder to keep a job, which leads you to not being able to pay for things like food or other things you need. In addition, without a home, you do not have the ability to have a stable community. Having a stable community can help one achieve financial stability. In a sense, evictions lead to more evictions, which continues the cycle of housing instability, which continues the cycle of financial instability. Now, another societal impediment is disparities in wealth among different groups of people. If you take into account someone's race, ethnicity, gender, whether they have a disability, etc., there seems to be large gaps between different groups of people when talking about each category. A lot of these disparities have historical causes that have persisted to the modern day. One reason for this is because certain groups of people legally had a harder time building generational wealth. For example, Black and Native Americans had a much harder time building generational wealth in the past due to discrimination compared to white Americans. Now, let's talk about legal impediments. So one legal impediment is how the landlord court system is designed. When a person who lives in public housing is evicted, they lose their home. However, they can take this to court, but this is where the problem is. In landlord courts, a defense attorney is not required, and for those who are poor, but not poor enough to be provided with one, they might not be able to hire a private attorney. In a criminal court, a person, no matter how much they make, is guaranteed the right to an attorney, thanks to the court case Gideon versus Wainwright. This is because in a criminal court, the defendant's right to life and liberty is at stake. But isn't that the same for when your house is being taken away? In a landlord court in Richmond, Virginia, for example, only 1 out of 10 times do the tenants have an actual attorney, compared to their landlords, which have an actual attorney most of the time. And this creates an imbalance of power between the landlord and the tenant. Now let's talk about housing discrimination, which is the next legal impediment. So laws and policies in the past, such as redlining, have had disastrous effects on how certain residential areas are structured today. The areas that were redlined still remain low income to this day. This is because the people in these areas were not allowed to receive home loans and were systematically denied various services. Most of these areas were and are still predominantly African American. Since the people in these redline areas weren't able to receive home loans, they weren't able to build wealth that comes with home ownership. And because of the lack of ability to build wealth, a lot of these families aren't able to move out of these redlined areas. While redlining was outlawed in 1968, negative effects of this policy still impact people today. What should we do as a society to help the underprivileged reach financial stability? Well, one solution that I found is expanding the housing voucher program. This means making it more eligible for people to get housing vouchers, as it is proven that it can help lift people out of poverty and help people have stable housing. One of the reasons for this is because they are able to spend more money on other essentials, since they are only spending a third of their income on rent. In addition, expanding this program will lead to more people having home, and like I said, home is essentially life. With proper housing, your life and finances are more likely to be stable. According to one study, comparing low-income families with and without vouchers, the housing voucher program was able to reduce homelessness by 75% and reduced overcrowding by 50%. Now, other solutions include fixing the landlord court system and how it's structured, and investing in areas that were negatively affected by housing discrimination laws, such as redlining. So with the landlord court system, providing a defense attorney to all tenants who cannot afford to hire a private one would be crucial because they have representation in the court. A growing number of cities in America are actually trying to follow through with this. If one side almost always has an attorney and the other side almost never has one, there is a pretty unfair balance of power, like we talked about before. Now, in terms of the investing in areas, it would be very beneficial because you're investing in areas that were systematically not given services. So overall, financial inequality is an issue that plagues many societies, including ours. Or while there is not one sole solution, some of the things we could do as a society to help people who have a hard time achieving financial stability involves refining the systems of our nation. It is not an easy task, but sometimes the things that are not easy are totally worth doing. If you want to learn more about this issue, I suggest reading the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond. It was one of my main sources of information, and the different stories presented in the book were really eye-opening to how many people in this nation live in it on a daily basis.
Wow, that was amazing. We'd like to thank the entire research cohort, Caitlin, Chima, Mohammed, Quentin, and Jameson, as well as the entire Tuxedo Union Free School District. The work of these students has been absolutely amazing, and their commitment to change both in their community and the world should be commended.
You can find the students' work on our website at teenthinktankproject.com/tuxedo summer. You can also find it and stay up to date with what the Teen Think Tank Project is doing on social media at teen_think tank. We cannot wait to see you next summer.
Until then, keep being awesome.